Hello? Does this thing work? This is the Peak Boredom Podcast.
Have a drink?
Oh yeah, do you have a drink?
I do.
Water?
Have iced coffee today. Another giant jar of iced coffee.
I just finished my coffee, so it's just water for me.
It's 9 p.m. and you had coffee? Oh my gosh.
Coffee helps stave away the hunger, and
True.
I'm still hungry.
Oh.
I'm more of a tea person. Anyway.
Hey guys, welcome back to Peak Boredom. Today we've got a special guest with us. This is Dom.
Hi.
And so I came across her profile from a post on Subtle Asian Eats. Yes, that's a group that exists. Would you like to describe what you do? Because it is quite unique in itself.
Well, yeah, sure. Basically, I am just a home baker and I am Filipino American. So I just try to incorporate Eastern flavors with my Western baking techniques. And yeah, I've just been working in the food industry for about 6 or 7 years now, and mostly self-taught, but I'm primarily a recipe developer / food photographer, I guess.
So you've developed a lot of really interesting recipes that I'm personally waiting to try out when I get home. And if you haven't checked out her profile, it is really interesting. So some of the stuff that she's done, black sesame chocolate chip cookies, lemon cake with lychee jam and lavender buttercream, lemongrass and blueberry tart, and tahini glazed yeast apple cider donuts. So if any of those sound interesting to you, check out her profile.
Right here.
But let's start with the first question. What do you think are some of the most underrated flavors?
Honestly, it's not so much that flavors themselves are underrated, but I think flavor combinations are less thought about as well. So like, I personally really like spicy and sweet stuff that go together, salty and sweet. And I think that in desserts, especially, people have this idea of it that has to be like super sweet and in your face sugar, especially in Western baking.
Yeah.
In American baking, like everything is very dense and it's heavy compared to Asian baking, and it's definitely a lot punchier in sugar and flavor. But I think that like the thought process behind putting different flavors together isn't as nuanced as it is in other cuisine, like savory cooking. But I think it can be it's just as important to balance your flavors in desserts.
So help us pick your brain a bit. We're gonna pick a few recipes and you help us go through what your thought process was to coming up with these flavor combos. So the first up, bay leaf infused chocolate cake with ube buttercream.
Yeah, that one was actually a really special recipe that I came up with a few years ago. It was probably like the first time I was trying to make something uniquely Filipino American. I personally actually don't like ube all that much.
Yes.
And that's what like started my fascination with it, or like trying to like pair it with different things, like, and try to make it something that I would want to eat. So the chocolate, I personally think that like chocolate is like a universal solvent in baking. Like you can put whatever flavor you want in chocolate and it will taste good if you balance it right. So the bay leaf, I really wanted to work with that too, because it's used in almost every culture in like the global South uses bay leaf. And so it's something that a lot of people will already have in their kitchens and maybe haven't thought about like using in a dessert or using in a way that is unique. So in flavor, bay leaf, if you smell it, it smells kind of like eucalyptus. It smells a little bit herbal and minty. And so if mint and chocolate or basil and chocolate is already like a flavor combination that is somewhat popular, then I didn't see any reason why bay leaf wouldn't be. So that's how I tried to infuse it into the chocolate, and it tasted really good. It does have, it brings a lift to the chocolate flavor, and it keeps it from being too heavy, especially with the ube, because ube is very earthy. It's very mellow. And so if you combine that with chocolate by itself, if you combine just ube and chocolate by itself, it kind of gets like muddy, or it can seem muddy. So the bay leaf is there to like lift it up and make it a little less dark in flavor.
Next up, my sister was personally interested in this one. Spicy cayenne caramel.
That one's fun. It was I actually had
looking at us weird.
Wait, explain what cayenne is.
Oh, cayenne, it's a pepper. It's a yeah, it's kind of it's not extremely spicy, but it definitely has a kick. So it's not like paprika, where paprika is more smoky and has its own flavor. I feel like cayenne is more heat than flavor.
Okay.
Yeah. So I like using cayenne because it's a little bit more mild, but it still has heat. Especially in this caramel, because it's really nice because when you eat it, you don't get the cayenne until later. So it kind of just like tickles the back of your throat instead of like punches you in the face with heat. I think it was inspired by this spicy caramel that I had from an ice cream store in San Francisco. And I just tried it, and it was really delicious, and I wondered how they did it. And so this was my version of that. I think the ice cream store was, it's called Smitten. I think they have a few locations here now, but that's where I originally tried it. And so I just recreated it, and it's delicious on ice cream because you can have like the cold, the temperature difference between the cold ice cream and like if it's warm, like the warm caramel, and then the heat from the spice. It's really nice. It's also good on like apple pie because it can be very, very sweet. And so the spice is there to just balance it out, basically.
Reminds me of a drink from my hometown. It's like hot, but when you drink it, it's like spicy and there's like sweet stuff inside.
What?
I don't know the name. I forgot. I'll put the thing here later. But yeah, let's see what's that.
Okay, the next one. Mars doesn't actually like chocolate because apparently she grew up in Germany and had too much chocolate.
Yeah, so I grew up in Germany when my dad was taking his master's, and I don't know, they see a little Asian kid, they're like, oh, she'll like chocolate. I usually give it to my dad, but
wow,
I do like Kinder chocolate. Like there's
like
some
hazelnuts. That's not real chocolate.
I like certain. Oh yeah, they all have hazelnuts. Yeah, I like fake chocolate. Let's just say that.
Interesting. So like the chocolate that you like, does it tend to be like very sweet? Like, do you like white chocolate or not really?
Yeah, I like white chocolate. Just things that has like the least amount of cocoa.
Oh, interesting.
But the funny thing is, I love. So in my hometown, Bandung, the brownies are like the it thing in my hometown. We have like baked brownies, steamed brownies, almond brownies, all the brownies you can name. Like it's like a tourist attract there.
Yeah.
So I like brownies, but I don't like chocolate. So I don't know. That's just the things least with chocolate.
So this is going to be an interesting one. Chocolate miso pecan pie. Because people think of miso, they think of, Japanese miso soup. So they think of that umami flavor and that kind of like seaweed association. So how did you come up with putting it with chocolate and inside a pecan pie?
Well, this one started with like the actual recipe itself because it started backwards. or in reverse of how I usually think of recipes is what I'm saying. Because normally I will think of a flavor and try to match a dessert or a baked good to that flavor to like bring it out. This time I took a dessert that I wanted to make, which was a pecan pie, and I added flavors to it to make it my own. So pecan pie from America is just really, really sweet normally. It's basically just brown sugar and corn syrup and pecans. And it's very overpoweringly sweet in most cases. So like I said before, chocolate is like a universal solvent. It definitely brings down the sugar level in pecan pie a lot, especially if you use like a semi-sweet chocolate instead of like a milk chocolate. And the miso is there to bring that umami flavor and salt to balance out the sugar, because boy, it's so sweet. I can't eat a slice of pecan pie by itself, but for miso pecan pie, it's a lot more balanced and it's a lot more enjoyable to eat, in my opinion. And in recent years, miso has been pretty popular as an addition to caramel. So you'll see recipes online for miso caramel or miso caramel ice cream even. And if you use it in like a proper amount and not too much, it just makes the whole palate a lot more well-rounded when you're eating it. So,
is that white miso or red miso?
I normally use white miso because it's a lot less funky. It's a little bit sweeter. So it does have like, it lends itself better to desserts than red miso, I think. But unless you're daring, unless you really want it, that's fine too. I don't prescribe anything to anyone. I don't think I have the authority to tell anybody what to do.
Pecan pie is good. My friend once made it for me for Thanksgiving, my first ever Thanksgiving. I like cream, so I kind of probably put too much cream, but it tastes really good.
It's good. It's just you can't.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can eat it all the time. You know what I mean? Definitely a special occasion.
That's true. So I think you've mentioned before, you're not big of it, like you have a sweet tooth, but you're not big of it, like you don't eat large amounts of dessert. So how exactly do you come up with your recipes?
Well, I mean, I don't eat everything, like the whole batch of what I'm making myself, because that just not physically possible. Like I will die if I do that because I bake so much. But I do have a sweet tooth, and I definitely crave like sugar and sweets. But for me, like the greatest part of recipe making is like piecing together the puzzle of the recipe. And so whether or not I am like in the moment craving something, that has less to do with whether or not I want to make something. It's more about the thought process and the cerebral side of it for me.
Wow.
The only thing Indonesians like experiment with their dessert is probably with like martabak. So it's like a really big pancake, but there's like yeast inside. And people would like put like weird flavors. Like this one time they did like red velvet or like Kit Kat. They would just throw Kit Kat inside and like cheese and like chocolate.
Yeah. Wow, cheese and chocolate.
That's definitely a flavor combo that apparently is not common out of Indonesia. So when we went abroad and I started telling people, oh, bread with cheese and chocolate, they all look at me like, why on earth would you put cheese and chocolate together? That makes no sense. But back home, it's just completely normal.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in Southeast Asia in general.
Yeah, Filipinos eat cheese on everything too. Like on cheese ice cream, cheese on like, we have cakes called mamon, which is like a little chiffon cake with a lot of butter. And so
we have those butter cakes.
Yeah. We put cheese on those. We put cheese on anything that needs like a little bit of salt, and it's that balance, you know? Like that's their way of balancing their palate.
That's interesting. So moving on to, I guess, a more serious topic. We discussed previously when we were talking before, we were talking about gatekeeping on traditional foods. And so let's talk a little bit about that, I guess.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I think I told you guys before that I had been working in the food industry for a while, and I had worked at like 2 Filipino American restaurants because I wanted to really learn about the cuisine and kind of what challenges Filipino Americans face in the food industry nowadays. And what I found was that like a lot of people are unwilling to kind of open their minds and broaden their palates about what Filipino food can be, quote unquote Filipino food, because there are a lot of people who are very, they just want to cling on to their traditions, and so they will always kind of shun or stick their nose up at people who are trying to do their own take on something because it may not be exactly what, you know, the way that their grandma made this dish or their mom's. And because of that kind of very set idea that the best Filipino food can only come from home cooking, it makes people less likely to want to spend money on someone else's cooking. Whether or not it's traditional or whether it's a different take on it, it's this idea that I'm only the best version of Filipino food can only come from homes. And that's really been a hurdle for a lot of Filipino Americans trying to make it in the culinary industry because it's difficult to sell Filipino food to people who are unwilling to buy it.
There's this dilemma back home as well, right? Of the idea of, oh, if it's not a Western cuisine, then it doesn't deserve to be on that list of high-class foods, and people are more reluctant to go to like restaurants where they have like expensive traditional foods.
Totally. Yeah, there is a lot of that kind of colonized mindset in a way, because we've only been told that Western cuisines like Italian or French food is worthy of this kind of status, this like quote unquote elevated status, that anything indigenous or anything that's not a part of Western cuisine doesn't deserve the kind of money spent on it and the kind of clout that people give it. When in reality, it's no different. Like some Italian nonna is no different than your grandma making this at home. So why should you spend like $20 on a plate of pasta and not the same amount of money on some noodles that you could feasibly make at home? But it's the expertise that, you know, people don't want to associate with non-Western food.
Yeah. Mars, thoughts on it?
It's like, it's a weird thing because like if you think of fried rice, there's like so many types of fried rice. Like there's the Indonesian one and like Chinese one. There's Chinese Indonesian ones. Like the place my parents grew up with, our food was like ethnically Batak, but like we also ate like Chinese Batak food, and then there's the Indonesian Chinese. Wow, it's just like everything's like mixed, and sometimes I feel like there's a gatekeeping in the food we have, that this is Indonesian food, and then we forget that there's the history in like the name itself, or the immigrants who came and then made like Chinese food but Indonesian style. Like Peranakan, for example, is Chinese people back then when they immigrated to Indonesia. I'm paraphrasing. Look it up in Google, where they came in and they're like, oh, we want to make something from our hometown, but we don't really have the flavors, so we make something that's in Indonesia that's similar, and that's become like a favorite of mine, like type of food. And I just don't know how, like, I've talked to my friends, and some are like very stingy about like what Indonesian, I don't know if it's stingy, just like what Indonesian food is. And I've always been kind of open in seeing like, of course this is Indonesian food, but that's also Indonesian food. In case, unless you know like the whole like rendang is crispy type of thing. There's a scandal in like this British
No, it was Australian
MasterChef
MasterChef.
is that Australian or British? I can't
It was
remember.
Australian.
Yeah.
Yeah, where they're like,
Yeah.
it's like Malaysian lady made like rendang, which is supposed to be not crispy anyway. And this chef was like, oh, rendang is supposed to be like crispy. And then the whole Southeast Asian,
I remember about that.
they erupted. Even like the Malaysian prime minister is like, even I know. Like in Twitter, he wrote, I'll put it here. Even I know rendang is not crispy. And it's funny because usually we fight about our food too. We're like, this is not rendang either. But then the one time, unless that happens, that's like valid. But even amongst our culture, I feel like sometimes we don't embrace those mix.
That happens all the time in Filipino culture too, because like the Philippines has such a colonized history, and it's been a port nation forever, and so influences come from all over, from China, from Spain, from Mexico through Spain, and most recently from America. And it's a very circular argument in a way to have with other Filipinos, like, what is Filipino food? Like, what is the true Filipino cuisine? What does that mean? It's hard to narrow down because so much of what we consider part of our cuisine has roots in other places. And yes, like the adaptation is what made it part of Filipino culture. And but by that logic, it makes it kind of silly to stop it there, to like prevent its growth and just keep it in this kind of very narrow view. And so that's why I think like the gatekeeping in regards to what gets to be called Filipino food, I think that it's a little pointless when you try to stop Filipino Americans from adding to the cuisine, just because that they have a point of view that may not necessarily reflect Filipinos who live in the Philippines. I don't think that they should be discredited for trying to expand the cuisine using the resources that are available to them, because obviously we don't have the same ingredients all the time, that Filipinos use traditionally. But to call it not Filipino, even if you're making a very similar dish with different ingredients, it just seems narrow-minded in a way. And food is fluid throughout cultures. It doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be so rigid, and it usually isn't. And so to pretend that it is detrimental, I think, to broadening anybody's perspective.
That's a very good point, especially since we were talking to another podcast. They were Vietnamese American, and they talked about how there's not enough representation of food from Southeast Asia in countries like America. And I guess with the gatekeeping that you're talking about, it makes it difficult for these kids who want to still learn about their parents' culture, but then they don't have the access to it. Like, they have to keep up the tradition on their own, and just by gatekeeping it, I guess it prevents them from actually learning the culture they want to preserve.
Interesting. Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, like, I didn't grow up eating Filipino food as often as maybe other people have, because my parents didn't cook. Like my mom and my dad were working all the time, and so it was really exhausting for them to like try to prepare a meal at home. So most of me and my brother were raised on takeout and fast food, unfortunately. So all of the learning that I've done about Filipino food has been on my own as an adult for the most part, and just my own curiosity about it. And so it's unfortunate for a lot of people that is the only way to get into preserving a culture. So yeah, like it would be nice if more people were, well, I mean, it's not that people aren't willing to teach or preserve the culture. I think a lot of people simply don't look and aren't told to look. So hopefully, if more people are producing food that may interest people in their own culture in a way that is relatable to them, that food can be like a gateway to learning more about the culture, like in a broad sense, as it has been for me. So
That's great. And well, I guess we move on to another topic, the food industry at the moment. We know that now that we're in COVID season, everyone's in lockdown, everyone has to stay at home, and we're basically living on a takeout lifestyle. And recently we learned something from you that we did not know, which is that the food industry is in trouble now that we're actually living on that takeout lifestyle rather than the brick and mortar restaurant style.
yeah, it's a very dark time for restaurants right now. I previously managed a bakery for a few years, and I can tell you from that, it's very difficult to make a profit on food, even before all the COVID crisis happened. As an industry as a whole, 90% of restaurants fail in their first year simply because it's difficult to make a profit from food. And that is because people are not willing to pay for the cost of labor, especially involved in making food. So prices of food have not increased to reflect the labor in producing, in picking food, in shipping food. Anyway, that comes across on the plate, and at the end of the day, people aren't willing to pay more, and that's because of social conditioning. But now that COVID has prevented people from even dining in, it's even harder for restaurants to make a profit. And third-party delivery apps have had such an impact on that. For one thing, yes, they are very convenient for the users. They do provide jobs for drivers, even though they're not always protected by labor laws, but that is a whole other conversation. But the way that third-party delivery apps work is they take a cut of the profit that was guaranteed by the food sale. So for Postmates, it's up to like 30% of a single sale. And most of the time, a restaurant only had like a 30% margin on their food cost. So to provide an outside service, whatever profit that they were going to get means that they're just either breaking even or oftentimes losing money using third-party delivery services. So if possible, if you're able to pick up call in and pick up your food in person, that is usually the best way to make sure that restaurants get the money that restaurants get the sale, essentially, instead of it going to the third party.
Yeah, that's rough.
I know.
Especially, I guess, for like ethnic restaurants, so like Southeast, like Chinese, and any non-Western, I feel like they're hit the hardest because there's this like no level of trust for them that they also make really not just really good food, but that it's they're up to a standard that normal Western restaurants are. I feel like is lost. I remember I talked to so like there's not a lot of Indonesians in Toronto, for example. So there was like only 3 Indonesian restaurants in the whole Toronto, and I was asking like why did it take him so long to just open a restaurant? It's just because like the way we make food also is like not trusted. I don't know why, but it was really hard for him just to open a restaurant and like make it in the industry, even though like he had a lot of customers that would come in and be like ordering from them. And I was kept that to my mind because as someone living outside the country of my own country, I really miss Indonesian food, and it's been really hard for people in like Indonesians in here to make a living in food, that they just don't even go to that route anymore. Like sometimes they just do like this whole like word of mouth thing. So like this aunt makes really good martabak, so you would just call this aunt, and this aunt would have like a network of people that would order every like Friday. So it has become like that. And I just feel like that's unfair, because if it's like a burger restaurant, everyone's gonna give the green flag to open it, but not like our type of food, just because it's different.
It's very difficult for new restaurants, especially if you are an ethnic cuisine. It's hard to find investors even to want to open a business with you, because if your cuisine isn't proven to be in demand all the time, then a lot of people won't want to take that risk on your kind of food. And there's also that gatekeeping that we were talking about earlier, where not only do you not want to maybe say you are willing to buy this food, how much money are you willing to pay for it? Because if there's this kind of stigma and this preconceived notion that, Southeast Asian food is cheap, or it's supposed to be cheap, then you will only pay a certain amount for this dish, and it may not reflect the actual cost of making it, or the cost of employing someone to make it, or the cost of the overhead for this brick and mortar space. And it's definitely a hurdle that people of ethnic cuisines have to consider when they're opening a brick and mortar shop.
And it's also definitely a really big problem that people in Western countries are not really willing to taste new flavors, which is kind of ironic, because they kind of colonized all of the information for that purpose. And this goes to a story that my friend told me. So she's Bulgarian, and she likes to explore different cuisines because she's obsessed with K-dramas and stuff like that. But she was introduced to Chinese food through me. And Chinese food is, of course, one of the biggest categories of Asian food that people are exposed to. But she went to a restaurant and she overheard the table next to her, which had just British people in there, ordering. And what they were ordering at the Chinese restaurant was steamed rice and steamed carrots and stir-fried beef without the paprika, without the onion, without the garlic. And oh my goodness, there's really not much there in that dish anymore.
Isn't that just me throwing like vegetables with water?
Yeah, so it was just literally just beef, and I don't know, I guess he doesn't know what's in the sauce.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I had the same thing. Like I didn't take it seriously back then because I was in first year. I was just here in Canada, and I had a friend who was like, just like she just said like, I'm not sure if I want to eat this Chinese food because I don't really know what's inside. And I was just like, it's chicken. it's chicken with pepper. It's
Yeah.
pepper chicken. Like, what do you want? Oh, I didn't think about it much back then, but then I sit on it and I'm just like, what do you think we eat? Like, we also have chicken and beef and pork sometimes. And I think there's this thing where like flavorful food is not really regarded as fancy food. Like there's this whole argument of fancy food.
It's questioned a lot.
Yeah. I watched a video, but I forgot what it said. But basically, like, I don't understand why sometimes flavorful food are seen as not fancy, just because like there's like different flavors. But then like things like fish and chips, is salt is seen as flavorful. I don't know how to make my. I love like this one time I was in the UK and I would ask like, you know, the only thing I know about the UK is fish and chips. So where should I eat fish and chips? And then this like they're really nice actually. This old couple is like, oh, you can eat fish and chips like in that restaurant. It's like very famous. It's like very good. You should try it. And like we were a bunch of Asians trying that, and we were just like, salt.
Yeah.
It's good. But like, I don't know. It's weird.
It is definitely weird. I mean, it has a lot to do with who's making the food, and if you're not white, you're probably not going to get the kind of respect in the culinary world that is due, and that is reflective of how people view your culture and your world position in global politics even. But it's even more mind-boggling to me when white chefs or chefs who are not of a culture then take a dish from a certain culture and claim to have perfected it and claim to have made the best version of this dish, you know, that was ever possible.
Gordon Ramsay pad thai.
Lucky Lee's in New York. That close.
All of that. The pho. I forget the guy's name. I don't commit these things to memory because it happens so often that there would not be room in my brain if I did. So yeah, it's a very frustrating thing to see. Somebody taking credit for an entire culture's centuries of history and putting their own spin on it.
Mostly because like, because the food from like Southeast Asia is not like clean. I mean, like there are different ways to make it that like satisfies your stomach. I'll just say it like that. That is a mind-boggling thing I've been thinking, because at first I was one of those people who was brainwashed, who was like MSG is bad and like
the MSG debacle.
Yeah, I was like, that's just a different type of salt. But anyway, I was just one of those people who unfortunately grew up thinking that our food is quote unquote dirty.
Right.
And it took me a while to figure out that was just a stereotype that was put in our food because it wasn't popular.
Mm-hmm.
But then why did they come and colonize us with anyway?
It's a stereotype. The MSG thing specifically was a stereotype to make it so that like people would have something to blame for any kind of mysterious illness, and it basically like the racism that Chinese people faced based on their ethnicity, not necessarily based on their food, it transferred over to their food. So it became associated with there's the stereotype that their food was dirty came from the stereotype that Chinese people in general are dirty. And so it kind of became like a feedback loop of like, we think that it's not, it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
and
it's a stereotype that people need to like a lot of people are still unpacking and like relearning. Like one of my cousins still very much thinks that MSG is bad for you, and it shouldn't be added to food when really it's a naturally occurring chemical, and like delicious foods are full of full of MSG like naturally. So it's not necessarily something to be avoided.
Yeah, and it's kind of mind-boggling to me that like Southeast Asian food is priced so lowly when it actually takes a lot of time for those flavors to develop. And it's just, why is it priced so low? It takes like maybe like pho. Pho is a bone broth. And bone broth don't just come in like an hour of cooking. They take like what, 6 hours was it?
Yeah, upwards. Yeah.
Upwards of 6 hours just to develop that flavor, and yet it's priced so lowly because people are not willing to eat certain cuts of meat and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then there's the lack of effort to understand it. I remember in Subtle Asian Traits there was a whole thing of people complaining that their pho came with raw meat. When
No.
when that's how it was served. That's how you get the best flavor from the meat. So
crazy. I mean, I've seen like posts on Subtle Asian Eats too about how some people would go to a Korean barbecue restaurant and complain that they were served raw meat and not know that they had to cook it themselves, or like I can't believe I went to a restaurant where I had to cook my own food. It's like
it's part of the adventure.
It's the fun part.
And yeah, I definitely think that people need to do their research if they want to eat there and be open to the way that other cultures do things. Yeah, sad.
Yeah, so that's pretty much all the time we have today. So the message for today is try new foods, keep an open mind, support your local restaurants.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Dom, for coming on. We're such big fans of your account.
Yeah, follow her here. I'll put all her stuff here. But we'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hello, hi. Thank you for listening to the Pig Boredom Podcast. This is Mars and Inga signing off, and don't forget to tune in next week. Please. Bye.